All right, I guess we can get started. So we'd like to welcome Mr. Michael McRoberts to our Colloquium series. He's visiting us from Atlanta, Georgia. He got his master's in biomedical and medical engineering at Clemson and his BA in biomedical and medical engineering at Northwestern. His company, Championship Analytics, was founded in 2011, and they've invented their game book, and they work with over 100 football teams. Michael has spent 20 plus years as a statistician in the financial sector, and so he's here to talk to us about what he does.
Very good. Well, thank you, Kristen, and thanks to everyone else for joining today. So as Kristen said, I'm Michael McRoberts, founder and president of Championship Analytics. And so just kind of what I had planned for today is I'll just kind of give a brief overview of our company and just kind of the inspiration behind it and how we got to the point that we are today. Then the second part, I'll go through the materials that we provide to our teams on a weekly basis and just kind of give a flavor for what those relationships look like in terms of how we develop these materials and what they're looking at on the sidelines from us. And then lastly, I thought it'd be just kind of fun just to go through some examples of the games from last weekend, just to show just the type of impact that strategy has on the outcome of the games and the types of things that we like to go over with our teams. It's there's some things that are very much just statistically derived. A lot of it are kind of logic problems as well, and so just kind of go through the process of how we go through helping the teams arrive at the conclusions that hey, what the math is recommending is the direction that we want to go in. And so I hope as we go through this, please stop me and ask your questions. It's probably much better to have an interaction than hearing me drill on for an hour. So please feel free to stop at any time with those questions. And yeah, it should be fun just to walk through these materials with you. I'm looking forward to it. So a little bit about myself and the background, as Kristen mentioned, I'd worked for about 15 years in the financial sector. When I got kind of started on this project, I had no background in football whatsoever. I tapped out flag football in college from a playing perspective. JV basketball, it's close, but so really I just always enjoyed watching the games, and like most avid sports fans, just didn't have too much experience playing it myself. But really just kind of from watching games on Saturday and Sunday, some of the things that I was seeing just in terms of fourth down decision making, how teams were using their timeouts, just general game strategy, just didn't seem quite right, at least from a mathematical perspective, that the choices that they're making just didn't seem to be the ones that should be leading to victory most often. And so really just kind of on a roundabout way that I just started to play around with some of the numbers. I got stuck in Buffalo in a snowstorm and just kind of found a data set. And really is just one of those things where just one thing truly led to another. Very quickly I realized that the math wasn't really aligning with with what they should be doing, or at least the mathematically correct decision. But then the big revelation came to me was that while there were more than enough people willing to criticize these choices on television, that there really weren't any tools that are being made available to coaches or teams to help make these decisions in real time. And so that just kind of became the inspiration for the company, is that could we give something to teams such that for any situation that comes up over the course of the game, could we deliver them the mathematically derived choice that should be leading to victory most often. So just kind of from there, and that inspiration, that this was something that I worked on for about a year and a half. Got a patent on it, things of that nature, which was super exciting. And then, then the next challenge came while we had something interesting. We needed to find teams that would be willing to try this in practice, which, as we found out, particularly not knowing anybody in the industry or having any background in sports, that you can't really ask, call up Nick Saban, ask if he wants to do lunch. So that was kind of a challenge. We reached out to pretty much every person in the NFL and college football, which solicited exactly one response from the offensive coordinator at Troy University, which just so happened to be within driving distance of Atlanta. So they were kind enough to invite me there. I showed up. They'd gone golfing for that particular day. I stayed overnight, came back the next day and met with them for a few hours. And long story short, for the price of exactly $0, we had our customer for the first year, the Troy Trojans. So to make a very long story short, one team turned into 3 teams the next year, one of which happened to be Montana State. To make another very long story short, we've got 6 people in our company now that work with us full time. 2 of them are the head coach at Montana State that we got back then, and his son, who was the person that was kind of our facilitator. And we'll talk about that role in a little while as to what those people do. But one team turned into 3, which turned into 15, and started to get some bigger teams on board, and really just kind of word of mouth that from the one team we had in 2014, we'll call it. We're now up to, we've got 60 of the top level FBS teams working with us, 4 NFL teams, and then just a number of teams kind of at the FCS, and we've got some high school teams working with us again this year. So it's been a really fun journey, and not something that we really expected when we got started with this. We really were just interested in the numbers and seeing if we could solve a problem, and it's just kind of turned from something that was a side, kind of a side hustle, into something that's fortunately something that able to do on a full-time basis now. So that's just kind of a little bit of background on the company. And so, what I thought I'd do is just kind of, dive right into what it is that we provide our teams on a weekly basis. And so I'll kind of flip over to that. So, I need to move this over. Okay, here we go. So kind of the base of what we do is, so we have what we call our game book. And if you're watching games on a Saturday, maybe with a lot of our guys, that you'll see somebody following around the head coach. Sometimes a lot of cases our guys will be following around with these charts on the sideline, standing next to the head coach. Sometimes, sorry.
If you changed your screen, it didn't come through on the.
Oh, it hasn't come through yet?
Did you only share the PowerPoint window?
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. Let's see. Maybe, how do I do this? Is this a new share? Let me do this. Oh, maybe I just need to do the whole. Oh, yeah, maybe that's it. Okay. I think
there you go.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that. Okay. So the game book. So we'll give these sort of charts to our teams every week. And we'll go through that in a couple of minutes, but it's something that changes on a weekly basis, corresponding to the strengths and weaknesses of each team. Like I said, that some of these guys will have them on the sidelines, some of them up in the booth, but so the majority is, or at least the first part of the game book, all deals with 4th down decision making. And so there's a series of charts incorporated within this. So what this is doing is helping the coach decide, on 4th down, should we go for it? Should we kick a field goal? Should we punt? And again, I'll walk through kind of, how that's determined in a few minutes, but just kind of want to orient you to the charts here. So there's a series of these charts because not only are the team characteristics are important, but also kind of the characteristics of the game itself. So if it's in the first quarter or if it's in the fourth quarter, if we're up by 10, if we're down by 10, all those are significant factors, on top of just kind of the general characteristics that could be entered into the decision. So just to kind of orient you to the charts here, this particular chart is for quarters 1 through 3. The point differential is -7 to +7. So as long as the game is within a touchdown either way, and we're within the first 3 quarters, this is a fourth down chart that these teams could be following for this game. So for the charts themselves, it's broken down across the top based on field position. So this is where the first down marker exists. And then across the side, you've got the yards to gain. So this is given according to, and then the minus is in your own territory, and then across the top. So this is kind of your opponent's end zone from left to right, and then down at the bottom right, that's your own end zone. So these are oriented according to where the first down marker is. So if you're starting off a drive at midfield, you're trying to get to the 40 of your opponent. So this would be kind of the reference point for whoever is following along with the charts would be looking at. So in this particular chart, or for all the charts, green is go, yellow is field goal, red is punt. And so it's really just a question of, if this is the opening drive of the game, that it's just a question of counting boxes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 green boxes here. So the recommendation for the team is that if it's 4th and 5 or less and 4th down, that's a recommendation for them to be going for it. You're going to kind of see some off-colored boxes here. So kind of if it's a darker green box, that's just kind of an indicator that, we recommended going for it on 4th and 4 for sure. Kind of 4th and 5 is kind of, we lean towards it, but if they want to punt, not the end of the world. And then kind of in the maroon section, it's kind of the opposite. That's, hey, it's, kind of a recommended punt, but if you wanted to go for it, then, also it's, the math is pretty tight in that space. So, and that's just kind of a function of a lot of the work that we do, is that, we like to give the coaches, a lot of flexibility and understanding, like, hey, here's the ones that we really want you to go for. If it's in other areas where the math is a little bit tight, then, kind of give them that discretion to, make a decision that they feel most comfortable with. But really also in practice, what the real advantage, I think, of having this information is that, it allows the coach, at the start of a set of downs, just to understand what that math is recommended. And while in practice, we would love for our teams to follow these recommendations 100% of the time without asking questions, that's just not really practical. We do have a handful of teams that'll do that. And then, another good chunk of them will follow it the majority of the times. But certainly it's got to be something, a recommendation that, they're comfortable with. And, you've got, 100,000 fans, screaming in your ears, things of that nature, that's, it's very difficult to tune out the noise and make good decisions. But hopefully this is kind of a tool that helps them get there. And the other, kind of advantage of this is that, if you've got a plan or what you're comfortable with doing on a particular 4th down, then that really can help the team set a course of action, not just on 4th down, but just on, plays previous to that. So it's very nice if you're kind of the person that's in charge of calling the plays, that, hey, if it's 3rd down and we have 7 yards to gain, that, a lot of the times that, that team or the person calling it, won't understand what that 4th down recommendation might be. So as an example, and we'll go through some of these, that, hey, if it's 3rd and 7, and we know that on 4th and 5, our team is comfortable going for it, that could very much influence what play we call on 3rd down. A team could choose to run the ball on 3rd down, again, hoping to get those, 7 yards for the first down, but they also know that, hey, as long as we get at least 2 yards, then, we've justified being able to go for it on 4th down. So, by able to kind of using this tool, it's not, it's great to be able to make good decisions, but it's also good to have a plan for both, understanding what we're going to do on 3rd down, or, what you'll commonly see as well, that, team will get into a tough spot, end up burning a timeout to try and make the decision. And that lost timeout is, lost resource that they can't use later on down the line, and it, will burn them in the end. So just kind of, so this is kind of our, signature chart, if you will, for opening drive of the game, as long as the game is within a touchdown. But then we've got a series of, 39 other charts that all deal with various times within the game. So, quarters 1 through 3, -17 or worse. On charts like these, you'll see more green on the charts because as you fall further behind, then you should be taking a few more risks on those fourth downs in order to kind of overcome those deficits. And then as we get into, let's see, we got end of the first half. End of the first half is kind of interesting in that it's kind of like in basketball. If you want to try to get a 2-for-1 at the end of the half, if you can steal a possession or get a fourth down conversion with, say, 2 minutes to go, then you're likely to get a possession, and your opponents, you won't be able to follow up, after that. And as we get into the fourth quarter, this is where kind of point differential starts to make a huge difference. In that, in general, kind of in the first half, the difference between a field goal and a touchdown is pretty common. It's if you want to take field goal to be 3/7 the value of a touchdown, that's pretty fair, through the first half and into the third quarter. But as we get into the fourth quarter, just every point differential has a different implication for scoring a touchdown or kicking a field goal. So you're just kind of pulling one up here. So fourth quarter with more than 5 minutes to go, if you're up by 9 or 10 points. Well, what's the value of a field goal then? Well, if you're up by 10 points and you kick a field goal, now you're up by 13. Well, what's going to happen? Your opponent's going to come back and they're going to try and get 2 touchdowns to beat you by 1. So in that particular instance, you've got the relative value of a field goal is relatively low in comparison to the touchdown, because of the exact point differential. And so there'll be very specific charts as we get into the fourth quarter that deal with that factor of just kind of the relevant values between those two. And then you'll also see just kind of some alternate colors start to come into our charts, just because one of these could be hey, this is a go if we're up by 10 points, and it could be a field goal when we're up by 9 points. So a lot of what we do and just trying to upgrade through the years is just kind of making this kind of a simple concept for teams, or being such that they can follow along with that, while also being very precise and descriptive in the recommendations that we're providing back to them. Any questions? I'll kind of pull up the settings as to how these charts are derived, but I'll pause there for a moment just for any questions. What's kind of been covered thus far?
So this is maybe the answer to this question doesn't make a difference, but I'm sort of curious. So when you're recommending, for example, to go for it on a certain field position and distance, is it because that gives you the greatest likelihood of converting that fourth down, or it gives you the greatest likelihood of winning the game at the end of the game, or does that make a difference whether or are those sort of synonymous?
That's a great question. So in some cases it's synonymous, in other cases, but the models themselves are built exclusively to what is the choice that's going to lead to victory most often. Okay. So, there are risks that you would take at the end of the game, 4th and 20 from our own 10-yard line that are, absolutely the right call because of, if you're trying to think of it as, what's the one that's going to, keep the score the closest or something like that, that's not really what we're going for. It's, what is the choice that's going to lead to victory, most often. So, there could be some weird things like, hey, if we're like a huge underdog and, if every time that we get close to the opponent's end zone that, we just absolutely have to take a shot at scoring a touchdown. And we know that, if you're at the 4 or 5 yard line, the chance of getting that score might be, 25% on a fourth down, and, the field goal is almost automatic. So, there's some models out there that if you're following football, there's like an expected points added model. And that's just kind of like, if we look at, one drive individually, so like, hey, if we've got a 20% chance of getting these 7 points, versus an 80% chance of kicking a field goal, from an expected points model, you would choose the field goal, every time. But if you've got a unique situation, kind of like what we described before, where, hey, the value of field goal is very low for this particular situation, or, hey, we're a huge underdog and we've only got a few chances to score, and if we don't get touchdowns, this field goal isn't going to be enough, then then that's not going to work for us either. So it's all based on, and that was really the first project that I put together when I started, was just kind of put together, this win probability model where, basically you just, you start with a play, it's, it could be 4th and 2 at midfield in the middle of the first quarter. And you have to, both, think about what are the possible outcomes of that play. And you could convert through a gain of 2 yards. You could throw a 50-yard touchdown pass. You could throw an interception for a touchdown. So really just kind of thinking through what are the possible outcomes of that play. But then also just basically from that point forward, based on what happened on that play, what's going to happen for the remainder of the game. So I'm not a classically trained statistician. I went through school in engineering, and I did work in statistics, but they tell me I just basically was a Monte Carlo simulation is what I was putting together. And I guess I didn't really know it at the time. But basically it's just a big old Excel file where I had, thousands of trials for each of these types of situations. And you just started to kind of use that, to figure out the math and what was kind of the relative win probabilities. And so, yeah, just, I guess, and just kind of getting down that train. So basically just kind of the process was to build this, really, fancy, simulator that you could kind of take any inputs and be able to kind of run a bunch of simulations and throw out a result. But what I found out about a year in was a little bit soul crushing at the time, is that you couldn't use computers up in the press boxes of games. And so that's really where it came to, like, okay, well, basically that's where the charts come from, is that, while you can't bring the computer there live, that just having these sets of charts that correspond to different types of situations and point differentials, that that was really just converting that win probability simulator into a series of charts that teams could actually work. And honestly, I think it works a whole lot better than having a computer, just because teams can kind of be looking at that and understanding what their recommendations will be just kind of coming into the week. Okay. All right. So the chart that I have up here, this is a setting sheet that we have. So for each of our teams, this is how we start our week off, in that we'll put together what the parameters are that are going to go into their charts for this particular week. And so some of the key characteristics is that we'll have the point expectation for both teams. So we draw this from Vegas, in that, for this particular fictional game, State versus Tech, State was a 3-point favorite, and the points expected to be scored in the game were 51. So that's how we derive just kind of the point expectation from that. And so that helps us with kind of a number of factors. We know things like historically what conversion rates will be at each distance. So 4th and 1, 72%, that corresponds to that point expectation for that team, for that game. It's also important to know the point expectation for the opponent. And again, this just gets into, are we the favorites? Are we the underdog? Is it supposed to be a high scoring game, a low scoring game? So again, just kind of getting back to that simulation, we want to know that, hey, if we punt on 4th down, what's the likelihood that we're going to stop it once we get the ball back? Or, it's not just, if we can convert, it's also, can we continue on and score in that particular drive? So knowing the point expectation for both teams is, it's quite critical. The kicker rating, so we kind of have a 1 to 10 system for our teams to follow. We kind of give them some parameters, and that, we've got our own system, but with a lot of these factors, getting team inputs from the teams directly is also quite important. She'll have situations where their kicker is a freshman, and we just don't have really any background information on that particular kicker. So we just kind of have like 10 different settings for them, for the teams, just to kind of give them their best recommendation. And so, I mean, of course, that's crucial to know that, hey, if we're trying to recommend going for it on 4th down versus the versus kicking a field goal, it matters if it's a 40-yard kick. Are they going to have an 80% chance of making that kick, or a 40% chance? And certainly at the college level, there's quite a bit of difference. If you've got an NFL caliber kicker, or your kicker has stubbed his toe or broke up with his girlfriend, whatever the case might be. I mean, you could have just a very dramatic difference between those kickers. And two, I mean, along with that, we'll look at the weather conditions for the game. So if you're playing inside in a dome, that's much different than oh my goodness, I just remember watching a couple of games at App State last year, and some driving rainstorms, and and some heavy winds and things of that nature. And certainly that we want to reflect that in the settings as well. So, a lot of times what we'll do for teams is that if it's looking like poor weather, we'll just even give them 2 different sets of charts. One if it's good weather, one if it's starts to rain or things of that nature. So other things we're looking at, just kind of the quality of the respective punt units. How good is our punter? How good is their punt returner? How good is the opponent's kicker that can come up with a few late game situations? And then just kind of a critical component that goes along the scoring for each team is just what kind of pace the teams play at. So how many possessions per game that they have. So we'll have some teams, like an Army that plays very low possession games. So if they're expected to score 27 points, well, that's 27 points in 9 possessions. That's a much different game than someone that's expected to score 27 points in 13 possessions. So just kind of knowing just kind of rating that point expectation in consideration with the amount of possessions that is expected for that game. So just kind of the process for a week is we'll send out these settings, get the team's approval, and come back and produce their charts for them that they can use on that upcoming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So it's a nice model for us just because every game is a little bit different, and so teams are constantly interacting with us and always getting their charts for the upcoming weekend. So just really good for creating engagement with us. And yeah, just kind of keeping them around from week to week. Any questions kind of on that, or how we work with the teams just with this? Okay. So yeah, and I thought what I would kind of do, and I think it kind of brings up some of the other points that of how we work with our teams, is just kind of walk through some of the scenarios that that happened last week's in the games. So I mean, the other kind of realization that I had when we started off is that, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, that like, all right, we've kind of got the answers here with the math, and I remember going to our first game at Troy, and just a unique situation came up at the end of the game as a 2-point call, which was very clear. It couldn't have been any clearer on the call, like what they should be doing, and they do the exact opposite of what our recommendations might be. And so you just kind of one of the lessons we learned over the course of the years is that it's fantastic to have the math, and it's important to have the math, and we've been working for 10 years on these charts just to continue to fine tune them and find different ways of giving the information to the teams. But perhaps more important than that is just and more important part of our job is just explaining the math to the teams, walking them through examples, and just kind of speaking for the numbers themselves, and encouraging them to follow along with these recommendations. And that if they understand, or if they don't understand why a recommendation is what it is, again, if they're if the game's on the line, their jobs may not be on the line, or whatever the case might be, that they need to understand the logic behind it and kind of believe it if they're going to kind of pull the trigger with some of these choices. And so
do you assume do you factor in home or away? I see location is outside or inside. Do you factor in if it's a home team or a visiting team?
Indirectly, yes. I mean, that will be reflected in the point spread for the game. So I mean, typically speaking, if you've got 2 very equal teams, that home field advantage is typically worth about a field goal. So you've got, two equivalent teams, by that nature, that the home team will tend to be, 3 points, favored over the road team. So, from that, there will be differences within our recommendations that are based on that. But I mean, there's nothing specific to being a home or away, but that is reflected as part of the, the point spread. Okay. All right, so we'll kind of walk through some of the things that happened last weekend, and just kind of what I was describing before is that, the challenges are, getting the teams to follow along with the recommendations, and, with kind of the different ones, or kind of the different noise that's, out there in the environment. So an example, and this is kind of a part of a package that we give to our teams, every week, is that, we'll give each of our teams on our service feedback on their own specific games, but then also that we'll give them feedback on some of the scenarios that came up from around the country every weekend. And so, this is kind of what we'll be doing here the next 20 minutes or so is just, very similar to conversations that we had on Thursdays for a lot of our teams, that they'll sit down and go over 10 or 12 scenarios that happened the previous weekend. And for us, this is just highly important that we think it's just a win if our teams are talking about strategy and some of these things that end up deciding games. That's one of the more important things that we can do. We just want our teams to be thinking about it, and how can we incorporate the strategy as part of our game plan. And so just kind of the first one we'll show here is just kind of an example of kind of some of the factors that we face, or just kind of the obstacles that we have to overcome as part of encouraging teams to follow along with the good game strategy. So the first example here from Florida State, Notre Dame was on Sunday night. So sorry, I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit. So so this is a 4th and 2 for Florida State in their own territory. 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. Went forward and missed. And then you'll see in the clip that Notre Dame very quickly came down and scored to go up 38-20. So I don't know if people were watching, if anyone on was watching this game, but the commentators were just beside themselves as to how Florida State could have possibly made this decision, leading to a Notre Dame touchdown. There was plenty of time to play, yada yada yada. And then just kind of comparing and contrasting to this choice the following night, which featured the exact same commentating crew. So this was Louisville favoring Ole Miss, down 9-0 in the second quarter, so a little bit more time to go. 4th and 1 from about midfield. They had the punt unit, delay a game, 4th and 6. They punt, and then 5 minutes later, here comes Ole Miss down for a touchdown. And so I won't go through them, just kind of I wish I had the corresponding audio clips from this, but the differences and kind of how these were presented were just, incredibly stark, in that for the remainder of the game, for the Florida State Notre Dame game, as Florida State continued with their comeback, continue to harp on, how could Florida State, possibly make this choice, and look how it turned out, yada, yada, yada. Louisville, 4th and 1 punting from midfield to Ole Miss, who they weren't expected to stop. They did not stop. They did not stop them on this particular drive. Couldn't have worked out. This is a 72% chance that they make this 4th and 1. Absolutely no commentary whatsoever on that particular choice. So this is kind of common in what we see, just kind of from the strategy perspective, that when you choose to do something like going forward on 4th and 2 in your own territory, particularly in your own territory, like in your own territory, it doesn't work out, you're going to hear about it from the commentators. You're going to hear about it from your fans. Even though that's, as we'll get into, this is absolutely the choice that's going to lead to victory most often. It's really something as a coach that you've got to have conviction about, because again, if it doesn't work out, you're going to hear about it, versus a 4th and 1 at the -45, we're already down 9. This is, a really, really, really poor call just from an analytics perspective. But because it's kind of been the traditional play for football in the past, that, that such things are generally overlooked, at least by the commentators. So it's really our job, just kind of from the analytics perspective, and then talking to our particular teams, to walk them through, like, hey, here's why, this decision, you should be making these particular calls. And so, kind of, what we'll break down here is, there's, 3 to 6 minutes to go in the third quarter, and where, while it seems like a lot of time, that, on average, that, teams that have given up the ball in that particular time period, they've only gotten on average, 3.5 possessions, for the remainder of the game. So, already down by 11 points, and, we get 3 or 4 more possessions, and, oh, by the way, our opponent is going to at least get that same number of possessions as we do, but since they have the ball, they may even get an additional possession beyond that. So, just trying to walk them through, like, hey, you may only have 3 possessions to go. Your opponent may have 4. You still need to make up an 11 points. The best you can, if you get 2 touchdowns and hold your opponent to a field goal and 4 possessions, that's only going to be good enough to tie the game. So really what we do is just kind of go through a series of arguments, and, we just want teams to, like, hey, this is a nationally televised game. It went, very poorly. The coaching staff really took a beating by the announcing crew, but, we want our staffs or teams that are working with us to look at this and say, hey, we know this is going to happen, or this could happen if it doesn't work out, but, here's what the numbers say. Here's why this gives us the best chance of winning, such that, hey, if they come up with the same type of situation in the coming week, we want to give them, every argument that we have to be able to pull the trigger at that point in time. Sense? So yeah, and this is just kind of an example of, this is a chart that Florida State could be looking at that particular time. Again, just to kind of orient you here, they had, they're trying to get to the 35-yard line. There are 2 yards to gain. That was a green box for us. But, this is also a case too where you'll see that, this is for quarters 1 through 3, but we also note that if it's in the maroon section, that this is, kind of a punt recommendation the first half, but if it gets to the last, 7:30 the third quarter, that these are ones that start to consider. So really, it was kind of a, at 3 yards or less, that was, kind of a go recommendation from us. Whereas if we look at the Louisville charts, and Ole Miss had one of the better offenses in the country, you can kind of see, kind of compare and contrast the differences between these 2 charts. That, it's the same charts, but just, kind of based on the fact that Ole Miss and Louisville couldn't stop them on defense. So, just the fact that, 1 yard trying to get to the -46-yard line, for them to punt in that, situation was just, just that was a tough one from, I guess, a former App State guy. So yeah, but again, like, just from my commentator's perspective in general, and it's the environment can change a little bit, but in general, those decisions are commonly overlooked. So one other example I'll show you from last weekend, BYU. And so this is kind of what we talked about before is, it's not so much, well, some of it is kind of knowing that recommendation, but a second part of this is, going into the play, what the 4th down recommendation would be, and how to kind of take advantage of that on 3rd down. So kind of running through the sequence. So they've got a 3rd and 16, and I'll kind of show you in advance what their chart looked like. So they're trying to get to the 41 of the opponent. So basically, if it's 5 or less, they should be going for it on 4th down. So I kind of run this clip here, maybe. Right. So commonly here, that's, on 3rd and 16, a team would be thinking, oh gosh, I've got to get all 16 yards. I'm going to chuck it down the field, past the yards to gain, and just hope for the best. But in this case, it's kind of a shorter pass, some blocking. Maybe it gets the 16 yards, maybe it doesn't. But now they've gotten within that 5-yard metric where they recommend going for it, and it makes some allusion to Kit Kats for dinners. Why they want to go for this on 4th down? Like, come on, man, this is the math. So these are really stressful situations for us, but thankfully in this situation it worked out, and really it's just kind of a nice 2-play sequence there for them, both from the fact that they made a good decision on 4th down, but you can really see on that 3rd down play that they didn't try to force something down the field that would likely could be incomplete, could be intercepted, things of that nature. But this was just a very competitive 3rd down play, and got them into a position where 4th down possibility, where 4th down was a real possibility. So I'll flip ahead to a few of these. I know we've talked a lot about 4th down decision making and things of that nature, but we'll kind of get into a lot of the things that we do are just again like logic problems and timeout usage and things of that nature. So just for fun, we'll kind of pull up here the end of the first half, App State versus East Carolina, and Professor Rollin can she'll give out a prize to the person here who can identify 2 different game management mistakes here that we'll see. Maybe one might be obvious, the second one may not be so obvious. So I'll kind of run this through, and then we'll kind of diagram here just some potential strategies that these teams could have tried. And of course that was overturned, and at the end y'all got lucky, just saying on that one. So okay, the announcers may have helped us out a little bit on one, but with the commentary, I don't know, could you hear the commentary at all? Oh, you couldn't hear the commentary? Okay, cool. All right, so there are really 2 things there, just kind of not 4th down wise, but just from a commentary perspective, just kind of some miscellaneous scenarios there. What could those, so 1 for each team, what could each of those teams done a little bit differently? Kind of start it over again. So
Should they
all
have,
right, so go ahead.
should they have tried to throw the ball when they were 4th and 18? Was that what was?
Yes, there's 2 different ones. I'll break the first one down here. So they got the 1st down, and then their next choice here was they spiked the ball on 1st down, which presumably stopped the clock, but they also had 2 timeouts available at that juncture. So the announcers kind of gave it away. I had the audio, I guess you guys did not, but he was pointing out astutely that at that point, saving a few seconds through the spike wasn't as important as losing the down. So now they've only got 2 opportunities to get the next 10 yards instead of the 3 that they had before. And given that they already had 2 timeouts remaining, but that was, they had the ability to, they had plenty of opportunities to run subsequent plays. So that was a little bit early from East Carolina's perspective to be calling that, or to be going with the spike. So the second one deals with, I'll give everyone another opportunity here. So here we go on this particular play. App State sacks the quarterback from East Carolina with 25 seconds to go in the first half. And both teams let the clock run down to a second to go before that Hail Mary is thrown. Anyone have a concept on what could have been done differently there?
So you potentially, if App calls a timeout there, they can get the ball, and the 4th down conversion is unsuccessful, they get the ball back, potentially.
100%. So in this particular case, if they call it, it's now 4th and 27, which is a highly unlikely conversion. That basically from that perspective, we call that kind of forcing your opponent's hand timeout. So now at 4th and 27 from the 40-yard line, now East Carolina with 25 seconds to go has to make the choice as to, do you want to throw this Hail Mary, which is a, not impossible, but it's a fairly low probability play. But also knowing that, hey, if we miss on this particular 4th down, that now there's going to be 20 seconds to go. App State has all 3 timeouts, and now App State has an opportunity to run 2 or 3 plays to get a field goal of their own before the half. So by failing to call the timeouts, essentially that gave East Carolina a free pass to run the ball, run the clock down to a second. And they could now throw that Hail Mary on the last play of the half, knowing that there's no drive to follow from Appalachian State. So it's, and these situations could be kind of tricky too, because it's, and sometimes if it's, say it's like 4th and 5 yards to go, you don't want to use the timeout because if the opponent picks up like 10 yards, then they're going to have more time to finish up the drive. But in this particular case, since it was more like 4th and 27, that the chances of them picking that up were so slim that just simply calling a timeout, and in which case, probably East Carolina probably would have just punted from that spot and kind of avoided the Appalachian State drive. And that potentially, give or take the ruling there at the end of the half, could have saved them a touchdown. By just kind of simply using that timeout sooner. Let's see, I'm just kind of pull up a couple more of these at random. So Clemson, East Carolina, this is the end of their first half. 3rd and 10 at their 37-yard line. Try to throw downfield, incomplete. I don't know what Clemson was trying to do here. Just hitting their foot on the ground a lot. They're really mad. End up taking a false start and end up punting the ball away. But we see in the past, like their field goal kicker has made kicks from 52 yards at least in the past. Or you can see kind of their target field goal line here is even at the 1 yard closer. So with this little time to go in the half, you really need a play on 3rd down that at least has the possibility of picking up a couple of yards. It's great if you can get the ball down the field, but you've got to give yourself some sort of a possibility to do something with it there. And they end up punting and getting the ball back, punting for a touchback, and ended up netting like 18 yards on that particular sequence, just kind of giving it away. Other things that work on with teams are just kind of like charts that will give them kind of like a sequence like this at the end of the first half. Clemson has 53 seconds to go. Georgia's on offense. And they really don't want to push it. They don't want to throw an interception or something like that. They've got their 7-0 lead. There's no real issue with where they're at. But one thing they do here is they run on 1st down, which is perfectly fine. they take their time to run on the second down play. And they run out the clock. It's pretty innocuous ending to the first half. But kind of our point in a situation like this, or a chart that we'll create for them, is that as we look at kind of the situation here, so there's 55 seconds to go in the first half, and the defense has 1 timeout. And so this is kind of something we'll point out to a team where the amount of time, if you're thinking of just running out the clock at the end of the first half, you've effectively got 40 extra seconds. And to make a very long story short, what our point here is that if they had thrown incomplete on first down, that they would have still been able to run the ball on second and third downs and be able to completely run out the clock at the end of the half. So kind of like our recommendation for Georgia in that instance was that on first down, even if you're trying to run out the clock, there's no harm in running the ball for a couple of yards, calling timeout, running it again. If the exact same thing happens, the clock runs out. But the advantage is that if for some reason on your second down, you run the ball and you run for 40 yards, in kind of the way that they played it, they would have had, maybe, 10, 15 seconds to go. But if they've been a little bit more aggressive with their timeouts, then, that same first down comes with 30 to 35 seconds to go in the half. So, kind of a lot of the things that we do, it's, again, like the fourth down decision making is kind of like the trademark, or kind of the, again, kind of the headliner of the service. But again, like a lot of what we do and a lot what we're trying to get our teams to talk about is just some of these miscellaneous situations that may come up, once a year, once every 5 years, or things of that nature. But when it does come up, it could kind of make a difference in your season. So you're trying to get them to talk about it and practice this and understand it is really, I think, a big part of what we do. So I'll kind of pause there. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so I just kind of wanted to leave an opportunity here for some questions or anything else you guys might be interested in.
I have a question. So for any one of these probabilities or likelihoods, right, there's a range of circumstances that got there, right? You're 4th and 2, and you have some probability of making it, and you give them some chance. If you look at all the instances in which you collected this data, right, there's going to be some trends that favored it versus, for the failures and the successes, right? If it was at 1st and 10, say you gain 8 yards, and then you're stuffed on 2nd and 2, 3rd and 2, that you don't have that momentum, right? This idea of momentum and what you do, and this is the coach's decision there, right?
Yeah.
How do you factor that in? Behavioral.
Momentum is kind of a word that makes most of us just kind of, shaking our, it's kind of a trigger word for some of us, and that it's, kind of like some of the work that we do in the off season is just kind of disproving the momentum. But it's kind of a favorite of the announcers, but there's really no evidence that, it's kind of like there's really not a lot of evidence that the play of a previous, or the outcome of a previous play really has any outcome on the next play. And actually that's a pretty strong trend, or pretty strong belief that we have to break in our coaches. And a lot of that is that, like, hey, we went for this 4th and 1 at our own 35-yard line and got stuffed, gave up a touchdown. And what are we going to do if, like, on the next drive we find ourselves in the exact same situation? From a coach's perspective, that's a really tough one, because you just got a poor outcome on a very similar situation. And it's certainly a hard thing to do that, we really hope for our teams, just kind of looking at 4th downs in general. If we've got a new team that signs up with us, that the first couple of 4th downs that we have with them, and we know it's kind of something that they're doing as a result of us, it's really nice when they have some success in that situation, just to kind of build that positive mindset. But we too try to emphasize with our team, and our general belief is that just kind of the outcome of a previous play shouldn't really impact what's going to happen on the next one.
Interesting. So then one more question. Sorry if I'm
sure.
People. So the data you use to give to these coaches, is it just other college games, or is it all, or is NFL games too?
Yeah, so we've got a separate model for NFL versus college.
So there are different probabilities?
Correct. Yeah, and so it's interesting. So we've got some high school teams as well, and kind of the differences in the game are that at the NFL level, teams are very efficient. So if you've got like a 4th and 7, they're more likely to convert that than a college team would, or like the passing percentage or the likelihood of completing a pass is much higher at the NFL level versus the college level. And then a high school level is even lower at that. However, at the lower levels of the game, if you go to a high school game or something along those lines, you'll probably see 2 or 3 runs for like 70 yards and a touchdown. At the NFL level, you will see 1 run for 70 yards and a touchdown, maybe over the course of the season. It just doesn't happen. So, there are certainly a lot of nuances to the game that we have to consider. At the NFL level, that teams just kick a lot more field goals than they do at the college level, and particularly at the high school level. And so just kind of with a modeling perspective, you've got to, take that into account. So if you're up by 1 or 2 points yourself at the end of a game, like at the NFL level, a field goal to go up between 2 and 5 points with 2 minutes to go is quite valuable. At the high school level, if the kid across the sideline, they may not have a kid that can kick the ball more than 25 yards, that same field goal could be completely worthless. So yeah, there's definitely different data sets and different nuances to each level of competition.
I would have thought that at the NFL level, there's less, everything's a little more exact and precise. Like you said, there's a likelihood of certain things happening, and there's not as much an advantage of where you are or anything. But at the college level, I think where you're playing, and I know you don't think momentum is a factor, but I think there's a lot more of emotional response at the college level than there is the NFL level. So I think some of these can be a little less precise at the college level than NFL, I think.
Yeah, well, college, I think the big difference between college and NFL is that there's such a different range of games that you have in play. Every game in the NFL is close. If you take the best team in the league versus the worst team, it's going to be maybe a 10 to 14 point spread between the two of them. Whereas even for an Appalachian State, if it's if you're playing Alabama next 1 week and Alabama A&T the next week, you could be a 35-point favorite 1 week and 30-point underdog the next week, just kind of depending upon who your opponents might be. And so certainly there's more of a range of type of games that you'll see at the collegiate level, and some of the charts that you'll see are can start to look and feel a little bit wild, just because of the nature of some of these games, where some games where the one team can't the teams can't stop each other, so why punt?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so it is 4 o'clock. So can we thank our speaker? You should see a little emojis if you over.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys.
You're welcome. And if anybody else has any more questions, you can feel free to stick around.
Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was fun. All right. Well, thanks so much,
Right,
Kristen.
well, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
You too.